Good morning. This meeting will come to order. This is a public meeting of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I'd like to welcome members of the public and market participants, as well as those on the phone or watching our webcast. I'd also like to welcome my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Quintans, Commissioner Benham, Commissioner Stump, and Commissioner Berkovitz. As always, we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Anyone is welcome to join. Today, the pledge will be led by Margie Yates. Margie, please come on down. Margie is a vital member of our facilities and operations team. She's truly a jack of all trades, whether it's helping to organize our annual FinTech conferences, our agricultural conferences, our open commission meetings like this, or our advisory committee meetings. She and her entire facilities team are instrumental in making sure this agency works day in and day out. So thank you so much, Margie.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, we assembled today to consider three matters relating to the Commission's swap data reporting rules. Specifically, we're considering proposed amendments to Part 43, which relates to the real-time public reporting of swap data. We'll also vote on amendments to Part 45, which governs the reporting of swap data to the CFTC. And finally, we'll consider reopening the public comment period for Part 49, which relates to swap data repositories. Reopening the comment period will allow the public to comment on all three swaps data rule proposals together. We'll now go ahead and move to opening statements. I'll go first, followed by my fellow commissioners in order of seniority. Commissioners are free to reserve their time to make a longer closing statement if you wish. After opening statements, staff will present proposals for the Commission's consideration, and then the Commission, we will have three separate votes, one for each of the three proposals. I'll just begin by saying that data is the lifeblood of our markets. Yet for too long, market participants have been burdened by confusing and costly swap data reporting rules. Simplicity should be a central goal of our swap data reporting rules. Making rules simple and clear advances compliance, price discovery, and risk monitoring. Everyone knows that I generally favor a principles-based approach to regulation where it's appropriate. But here, there are a number of cases where a rules-based approach makes more sense, and swap data reporting is one of those areas where prescriptive rules are actually much more helpful to market participants and to the Commission. They provide clarity and guidance and reduce unnecessary burdens. Without clear guidance from the Commission, SDRs and market participants have been left to wade through Parts 43 and 45 on their own. We've essentially asked them to guess what specific data fields they should be reporting to us, rather than us telling them exactly what we're looking for and why we need it. As a result, we've seen a proliferation of reportable data fields that in some cases have run hundreds deep. But yet for all its sprawling complexity, the current data rules omit uncleared margin, creating a potential black box of systemic risk. And that just describes CFTC reporting. Our market participants also have to report to the SEC, as well as the European Securities and Markets Authority, known as ESMA. These different reporting regimes have created a Byzantine maze of fields and timetables. Today's proposed amendments to Part 43 and 45 are a first step towards changing this system. In fact, our Part 45 proposal includes a technical specification that identifies 116 standardized data fields. We're also proposing our efforts to harmonize our swap data reporting requirements with those of the SEC and ESMA. This harmonized approach will reduce the burdens of duplicative reporting while painting a more complete picture of market risk. We're also proposing to enhance public transparency by fixing certain reporting practices that distort what's actually happening in our markets. And then finally, commercial end users. Commercial end users who use swaps periodically for purposes of managing their risk shouldn't have the same reporting requirement obligations as big banks who are in the swaps market day to day. So we provided a little relief for end users as well. Simplifying our swaps data reporting rules to achieve clarity, standardization, and harmonization will inevitably make for sounder regulation. And I'm so grateful for our staff, which spans several different offices, for working on this in the past few years. Thank you so much. I'd now like to recognize other commissioners for their opening statements. We'll start with Commissioner Quintens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Good morning to the staff. I'm pleased to support the data proposals in front of us today, which I hope will represent the beginning of the end of this agency's longstanding efforts to collect and utilize accurate, reliable swap data and further our regulatory mandates. I think there is frequently a trade-off between being first and being right. That is especially true when it comes to regulation, and I think specifically true when it comes to the CFTC's historical approach to the uncleared swap data reporting regime. Although this agency was the first regulator in the world to implement swap data reporting requirements, it did so only in a partial, non-descriptive, non-technical fashion, which in my opinion has led to the fact that even today the Commission has great difficulty aggregating and analyzing data for the uncleared swaps market across swap data repositories. But I am pleased that over the last few years the CFTC has continued to lead global efforts to reach international consensus on these reporting requirements so that derivatives regulators can finally get a clear picture of the uncleared landscape. I do want to note, just for clarity purposes, the difference between the historical and even current poor usability of the uncleared data that we have versus the significant usability of the swaps data that's been produced by clearinghouses for cleared swaps trades. In fact, that data is used regularly by the Commission to monitor risk in real time, even at the client portfolio level. And it's my hope that as we finalize these rules today, we will move the uncleared regime towards that usability and that functionality. Thank you to Megan, thank you to Richard, thank you to the entire team for your hard work on this. It's taken a long time, and I'm very appreciative of your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Benham.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. First off, thanks to DMO staff, the entire team that's here before us, and anyone else who worked on this rule. As always, critical amount of work that's been done, and I appreciate your time and your effort working with my office to get here today. Also, like Commissioner Quintens, I look forward to supporting both of the rules today. We'll have a number of questions after the presentations. And also, I will publish a statement later on after the meeting. I think as a general matter, echoing both the Chairman and Commissioner Quintens, it goes without saying the importance of data and what we learned from the financial crisis and how important data is to our role and our responsibility as a regulator. Certainly, I don't think we could have avoided the crisis in 2008 if we had a lot more data, but certainly I think data, the right data, and collecting it in a punctual manner and being able to sift through it and digest it and understand the risks that it poses to the market would have given us a better picture of the risks that are out there. So I think this is a great step towards fulfilling some of those mandates from 2008 and 2010. Certainly it's been a long effort to get here, and I think there's always going to be improvement that we need to be making domestically with our regulators across the city, but of course our partners across the globe in Europe and in Asia as well. So again, thanks for your work. Look forward to today's presentation and the questions, and very much looking forward to supporting these rules and having a better data set to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Stone.
Thank you. I'm extremely pleased to be here today to advance these rules, and I want to thank, like everyone is very grateful to all of the folks who've worked to get us where we are today, but particularly the Division of Market Oversight, who've not only worked to get this step before us, but have worked over the past several years to ensure that the public had ample opportunity to weigh in. And I think for me, anyone who knew me during the crisis and everyone was responding, I happened to work on Capitol Hill, knows that I consider this particular set of rules to be foundational to effectuating the reforms that we were tasked with. It's sometimes overlooked as being as important as it is, but I think we can't follow through with all of our other mandates under the reform agenda without having the appropriate and adequate data. So thank you all. I applaud your commitment to adapting these rules, and I really appreciate your efforts to incorporate some suggestions from my office as well. I also want to thank the Office of the Chief Economist and the Office of the General Counsel, some of whom were in my office at close of business yesterday. So you all have done a tremendous amount of work to get this rule to the place where it is today as well. And finally, a special note of gratitude to Dan Buxa for his work, both in his capacity as the Deputy Director in DMO, where he was the team lead for some of these rules, for all of these rules, and in his current capacity in my office as the Chief of Staff. So at the onset of the financial crisis, the most obvious regulatory predicament was the OTC swaps and the lack of information that we had about them. The Pittsburgh Accords were predicated upon the global regulatory community needing to procure data to inform decision makers about these opaque markets. I've long believed that lacking information, especially concerning the swaps market, was among the most fundamental issues to be addressed post-crisis. In 2012, the Commission was a first mover in establishing reporting requirements for swaps, and other regulatory bodies have since followed. However, despite the substantial efforts and the cost of implementation, the different data elements, formatting, and technical specifications utilized by individual jurisdictions make it extremely difficult to aggregate the data across global markets and thus limit the data's utility. The G20 Leaders Directive from Pittsburgh in 2009 included an expectation that members would assess regularly implementation and whether it is sufficient to improve transparency in the derivatives markets. And I'm pleased that today the CFTC is heeding this direction. Because with the benefit of time and experience, we are able to better harmonize with other regulators around the world, reasonably refine the reporting obligations to a common set of comparable elements, reportable elements, improve the accuracy of regulatory reporting, and reduce the burden placed on end users. I expect the takeaway from this meeting may focus on a limited number of policy choices we are making, but I feel it's important to highlight the multitude of positive improvements included within the proposals. For example, previous iterations of the swap data reporting rules lacked specificity and did not include clear definitions, allowable values, or form and manner for all reportable data elements. By more clearly defining what is expected, the proposal also appropriately removes what has become known as the catch-all bucket, which in some circumstances resulted in the menu of options on what and how to report swap data expanding from several hundred to over 1,000 swap data elements. Today, we hope to present a more tailored and finite list of required swap elements that have been identified by the staff as possessing tangible and repeatable use cases. The proposed rule also improves the efficacy of the swap reporting by focusing on price-forming events and minimizing the dissemination of extraneous information that does not foster price discovery. The rule removes the requirement to report the mirror swap components of the prime brokerage process that has limited price discovery value. The proposal also clarifies how and when to report post-priced swaps and risk compression exercises and highlights these unique transaction types in the public tape. The proposal reasonably extends the deadline for reporting regulatory data for swaps to T+1 for large, sophisticated reporting counterparties such as swap dealers, and T+2 for smaller, less frequent reporting counterparties such as end users. This not only harmonizes our rules with fellow regulators, but correctly puts the emphasis on ensuring that the swap data is accurate rather than focusing on speed. The proposal further reduces burdens on end users by removing the requirement for those counterparties to submit valuation of uncleared swaps on a quarterly basis. Today's proposal creates a mechanism for achieving higher quality swap data. The rule standardizes validations across SDRs, empowers SDRs to apply validation and reject swaps, and clarifies that reporting counterparties have the onus to address error causing any rejections in order to come into compliance. This represents a robust attempt to ensure that reported swap data is complete, formatted in a standardized and harmonized manner, and accurate. And now for what I expect will be the topic garnering much public attention today, block trades. As envisioned by the original rule, the proposal utilizes current data to reset block and cap sizes to more appropriately delineate the profile of various products. By applying the information we now have at our disposal, it was determined that additional categories for block transactions are necessary, such that we might move away from one-size-fits-all, the approach that's currently in place, by differentiating between overall trading activity and transaction size of distinct products. In general, the block sizes would increase, meaning that fewer transactions are eligible for block treatment. This attempt to ensure that only the most appropriately sized transactions are publicly disseminated with a greater time delay would also warrant consideration as to the suitable length of time for such delays. To allow market participants to effectively transact in large sizes and hedge their positions appropriately. The Commission and staff have received divergent views on this topic since the inception of these rules. The guiding statute requires consideration of whether public disclosure will materially reduce liquidity. Frankly, I do not know the right answer. Last night, I reviewed several comment letters received on the topic with wide-ranging opinions. Life insurers, asset managers, and energy companies who are counterparties to swap dealers express the need for longer delays, while some fund managers and liquidity providers express concerns for any expanded delays in public reporting. Today's proposal presents yet another opportunity for further comments, and the Commission will benefit from any information that you all are willing to submit to us with regard to the specific changes, and there are many with regard to the block transactions. I think it's unfair for it to be reported as only an extension to the delays because it's multifaceted, and I encourage folks to read the entire set of proposals with regard to block trades before reacting. And with that, I'm happy to support the rules. I again want to thank you all for your efforts. I look forward to the presentations and the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my statement on the rules before us today, I'd like to recognize a couple former commissioners in our audience today who are present here. Commissioner Hatfield, Commissioner Fred Hatfield, who was a commissioner of the CFTC from 2004 to 2006 or 7, I believe, is with us today. And Commissioner Fowler West, who was a commissioner from 1983 to 1992, I believe, is present, close enough, is with us today. I had the privilege of meeting with Commissioner West earlier this week and revisiting some history and a couple notable aspects. Commissioner West was the staff director for the House Agriculture Committee under Chairman Pogue and Chairman Foley, and was staff director of the committee at the time that the Commodity Futures Trading Act was passed in 1974, so present at the creation of the CFTC, and was describing, he was actually on the telephone call with the chairman of the committee and President Ford when President Ford was considering vetoing that legislation, and the chairman helped persuade President Ford not to veto that bill. But that really was a visionary act, and we owe a tremendous gratitude for the foresight of those in Congress at the time in supporting that 74 Act in terms of giving this agency exclusive jurisdiction over all futures products across all types of commodities and expanding the CFTC's jurisdiction not beyond agricultural products into any type of product for which there could be a futures contract. And you think about it, at the time in 1974, those were turbulent times in our markets. We were just about to enter or started to enter a period of tremendous inflation and oil, energy, the Arab oil embargo, real significant ramp up in energy prices, and the market participants and companies needed a way to manage those risks. And this agency expansion of jurisdiction and the regulation of those markets really enabled the expansion of these risk management tools that are so prevalent today. Commissioner West was also instrumental in another item that is very near and dear to my heart, and the Commission has dealt with recently. In 1990, Commissioner West issued a dissent on the Brent interpretation that the Commission refused to publish. Commissioner West provided me with a copy of the seriatim. It was a 3-to-1 vote where the Commission voted not to publish Commissioner West's dissent on the Brent interpretation. And Congress took note of that, the Commission's determination not to publish the dissent. And Congress took note of that and revised the Commodity Exchange Act, which is now Section 2A10C of the Commodity Exchange Act, to provide that any time a commissioner has a concurring or dissenting opinion on any matter before the Commission, that the Commission shall publish that dissent. I know, Mr. Chairman, and all my colleagues here are a great supporter of commissioners' rights to speak and to issue dissents and to have their views published on any commission matter. And recently, that view of the Commission and that statutory authority was upheld by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in a case that we are still dealing with. But in terms of the Commissioner's rights to issue opinions and to have those opinions published, and that is a right that the Commission can't deny to a commissioner, nor can a court deny to any commissioner. It's a statutory right we all have. And I thank my colleagues for the support of that right that we have seen. I thank the General Counsel for his excellent defense of that right, and even the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals recognized the excellence of the defense of that right in the court. So I want to express my gratitude for Commissioner West for standing up for that principle back in 1990. I went back this morning. I was just curious to see if this opinion is published on our website. And interestingly enough, there is a link to it. If you look at biographies, we have on our website, we have biographies of former commissioners. So you can go back and look and see the bios of former commissioners, and there's a link to Commissioner West's dissent, but there's nothing there. The link is not active. So I would ask that today the Commission, by unanimous consent, that we actually publish Commissioner West's dissent from 1990 under the authority of 2A10C.
So moved. We will hereby publish.
Thank you. So I'd like now turn to the business beforehand, the two rules we have before us. And I support issuing both of these rules for public comment. On Part 45, collecting swap data is absolutely critical to fulfilling the purposes of the Commodity Exchange Act, including ensuring the financial integrity of all transactions subject to this act and the avoidance of systemic risk. The financial crisis of 2008 showed how a lack of transparency in swap trading and regulators' inability to monitor risk can create fertile ground for the accumulation of excessive risks. The Commission must collect appropriate swap data to fulfill its statutory mandate. The data must be accurate and sufficiently standardized so that the Commission can easily aggregate and analyze the data reported to different swap data repositories. The Commission must be able to determine how different derivatives categories and products are being traded, as well as the positions and risks that different market participants are taking across the entire swaps market. I support today's proposal to amend the Part 45, 46, and 49 reporting requirements because it would improve the standardization and accuracy of swap data reported to SDRs and would thereby strengthen the Commission's ability to oversee swap markets. I commend the many CFTC staff members who have spent years reviewing swap data and helped improve the data reporting framework. I also believe that in addition to having valid data, we must have the tools to analyze the data and determine whether there are excessive risks in the marketplace. I think that the Commission should devote greater attention to this effort, and I will be talking about that a little bit further.
With respect to Part 43, I'm voting this is the real-time public reporting requirements rulemaking. I'm voting to issue for public comment the proposed rulemaking that would amend certain rules requiring real-time public reporting of swap trades. The proposal is intended to enhance the existing real-time public reporting framework adopted in 2012. Although I'm voting to issue the proposal for public comment and believe that many of the provisions in this proposal would be beneficial, I do not support the provision in the proposal that would permit a 48-hour delay in the reporting of block trades. A 48-hour delay for all block trades is simply too long. The 48-hour delay could impede rather than foster price discovery. It could also undermine market integrity by providing counterparties to large swaps with an unfair information advantage. While an appropriate block trade reporting delay is mandated by statute and is necessary to allow effective hedging of the position, the delay should be appropriately limited. I commend here on this rulemaking too all of the CFTC staff who have worked on the reporting rules. I also appreciate all the time the staff took with me and my staff over the past several weeks, including also late yesterday afternoon and also the Office of General Counsel to help understand the rule and to make improvements to the draft that was presented to us. Getting swap reporting right is a difficult but important function of the Commission. Improving price discovery through real-time public reporting serves a core CFTC mission. The proposal offers a number of pragmatic solutions and improvements to known issues with the current rule. Significantly, there will be fewer block trades under this rule. They will, however, be of a larger size. These improvements should not and need not come at the expense of market transparency and the level playing field. I look forward to the presentation by the staff and to comments on these proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So allow me also to welcome former Commissioner Hatfield, as well as you, Commissioner West. We also look forward to publishing, even if it's 20 years late, your opinion. I also want to take an opportunity before we hand it over to the staff to make their presentation to especially thank all my fellow commissioners for their input on this rule and for the exchange of ideas and debate, particularly Commissioner Stump, who has led the Data Protection Initiative and was played a key role in this, and particularly Dan Buxa, her Chief of Staff. We couldn't have done this without you, alongside the hard work of the staff. I also want to thank some people that are not in the room today. Two agencies in particular, the Securities and Exchange Commission and ESMA in Europe. Both of them had an opportunity to comment on our rules and provide feedback, and this is one of the rare occasions where we've worked with other agencies to really get something together which has some degree of harmonization for market participants. So I want to thank our fellow regulators as also for their contributions. Staff will go ahead and make a presentation to the Commission on today's proposals. Staff will present all three proposals together because they're closely related. After the presentation, the floor will be open for questions from each commissioner. Following the close of the discussion, the Commission will vote separately on each proposal. All final votes conducted in this meeting will be recorded votes. The results of the votes approving an issuance of the rulemaking documents will, of course, be included with those documents in the Federal Register. So to facilitate preparation of the approved documents for publication in the Federal Register, I now ask the Commission to grant unanimous consent for the staff to make the necessary technical corrections prior to submitting them to the Federal Register.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Without objection, so ordered. Okay, at this time, I'd like to welcome the following staff for their presentation on today's proposals. And we actually have 9 staff members with us today, showing the breadth of and the amount of work that went into these rules. We have Dorothy DeWitt, who is our Director of the Division of Market Oversight. We have Megan Tente, Acting Associate Director from the Division of Market Oversight. John COUGHLAN, who is our Research Economist in the Office of Chief Economist. We have Kate Mitchell, who is an IT Specialist with our Office of Data and Technology. We have Richard Moe, Special Counsel with the Division of Market Oversight. We have John Roberts, Research Analyst with the Office of Chief Economist. We have David Aaron, who is Special Counsel in our Division of Market Oversight. And also from the Division of Market Oversight, we have Matthew Jones, Attorney Advisor, and Benjamin DiMaria, Special Counsel. So thank you so much. With that, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Dorothy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Before we start, I want to give that thanks on behalf of everyone at this very long table and those that are not at the table that helped contribute to this rule. Before we start our presentation today, we would like to take this opportunity to give everyone an idea of the achievements that these proposals represent. We would also like to recognize the many people who have made these proposals possible. These two new proposals relating to Parts 43 and 45, along with our existing proposal related to Part 49, Swap Data Repository, Data Verification, are the product of years of efforts and coordination, both within the Commission and outside the Commission on an international scale. In 2017, the Division of Market Oversight, Data and Reporting Branch, sometimes referred to as DAR, which announced the roadmap to achieve high-quality swaps data. However, the Commission, DMO, and the Data and Reporting Branch have been working since the commencement of swaps data reporting in 2012 to improve data quality and the reporting system for both the Commission and for market participants. We believe that the three roadmap proposals, including the two we're presenting today, will work together to achieve the roadmap's goals of ensuring the Commission receives accurate, complete, and high-quality data for swaps transactions. This will first allow the Commission to accomplish its regulatory mission to more effectively and more efficiently achieve its regulatory mission. It will also allow us to simplify, streamline, and standardize the reporting system for our reporting entities and the public. Finally, it will update and clarify other swaps data requirements for our market participants. Data reporting can be a dense and highly technical topic. Yet it's critically important that the reporting system be as clear and as efficient as possible. Quality data is essential for every Commission, division, and office to perform its responsibilities, and for the public to better understand the swaps markets. We believe these roadmap proposals would be immensely beneficial to the Commission, market participants, and the public by molding a reporting system that is more standardized, more harmonized, and more user-friendly for everyone involved. These proposals reflect an important achievement because they serve as a model for coordinated, data-driven policymaking. Data quality is an issue not only for the CFTC and its registrants and market participants, but also for their international counterparts. These proposals and the global coordination that went into developing them reflect the CFTC's core vision to be a global standard for sound derivatives regulations. They also reflect the CFTC's core values of commitment, forward-thinking, teamwork, and clarity. That last core value, clarity, is a word that you've heard many times already today and will continue to hear it throughout this presentation. The team sitting here who crafted these rule proposals engaged in extensive coordination with our colleagues within the CFTC, with our market participants, and with our U.S. and international counterparts in an effort to ensure the proposals will improve and optimize the data reporting system. The contributions that arose from this coordination have been invaluable, and we would like to thank many of them specifically. First, we would like to thank our CFTC colleagues throughout the agency. This includes our colleagues within the Office of Data and Technology, the Office of the Chief Economist, the Office of International Affairs, including those seated at the table today, as well as those in the audience. Their data expertise and leadership in coordinating the harmonization efforts, both domestically and internationally, were invaluable. We'd also like to thank our colleagues in the Division of Clearing and Risk, the Division of Enforcement, the division of our other colleagues in the Division of Market Oversight, and the Division of Swap Dealer and Intermediary Oversight, as well as the Office of the General Counsel. Their crucial feedback and review of these proposals especially helped craft the proposed data fields in the way that they helped craft the proposed data fields. We'd also like to thank the chairman and each of the commissioners and their staffs for their constructive feedback as well as we prepared these proposals, which served to challenge our analysis and, as a result, markedly improve the final product. We'd also like to thank our colleagues from other regulators who coordinated with us on this data harmonization effort and provided valuable feedback on the proposals. These colleagues and counterparts include our counterparts at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the European Securities and Market Authority, or ESMA, all of the members of the data harmonization efforts under the auspices of CPMI and IOSCO, and the Financial Stability Board. We would also like to thank the many market participants who provided feedback on the data reporting system and suggestions for improvement. We particularly appreciate the feedback received for improving public data reporting. The public is the intended audience for this data, and we want to make sure that this reporting is as useful and user-friendly as possible. We look forward to even more feedback from the public reporting from the public during the comment period for these proposals. Finally, I would like to recognize and express my appreciation for the DMO DAR staff, including Megan Tente, David Aaron, and Richard Moe. They will be presenting today, and also Ben DeMaria, Tom Guerin, Kristen Leigel, and Ellie Mishry. Their tireless efforts in leading and drafting the roadmap proposals have made today's achievement possible. We all owe them a debt of gratitude for the improvements to the reporting system that are reflected in these proposals. It's now my pleasure to introduce Megan Tente, the Acting Associate Director for the Data and Reporting Branch, to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present these proposals. Today, we are presenting two notices of proposed rulemaking for the Commission's approval. The first proposes amendments to Part 45 of the Commission's regulations. These regulations cover the swap data reported to swap data repositories, or SDRs. CFTC staff uses SDR data to measure risk, monitor trends in compliance with our rules, and produce both internal and external reports. The second proposal amends Part 43 of the Commission's regulations. These regulations cover swap data that market participants report to SDRs for public dissemination. Section 2A13 of the CEA directs the Commission to provide for the public availability of swap transaction and pricing data. In doing so, the Commission has to ensure that the public data does not identify the swap counterparties. It has to provide a time delay for outside swap transactions and account for whether the public disclosure of this data will materially reduce market liquidity. We're going to begin the staff presentations on the Part 45 proposal. The goal of the Part 45 proposal is to standardize the data the CFTC receives, adopt international technical standards to standardize data across borders, and amend our rules to ease burdens for reporting parties where doing so will not impact the CFTC's ability to fulfill its responsibilities. Since 2012, the CFTC has obtained a significant amount of swap data from market participants. To date, counterparties have lacked clear standards from the Commission for reporting data to SDRs. This has created issues with standardization that have posed challenges to staff in using the data and to market participants in reporting the data. Today's proposals adopt international standards to help standardize the data the Commission receives. To provide some background, John COUGHLAN, a research analyst in the Office of the Chief Economist, who helped us in drafting the proposed swap data technical specifications, will share his experience using the data to help frame the issues the proposal addresses.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present. At the CFTC, I'm a heavy data user of the swap data. I've been working with the Part 45 swaps data since I joined the Commission in 2015. I've also worked in DSIO and DMO prior to joining the Office of the Chief Economist. So in these roles, I've worked extensively with the swaps data for different purposes. I'm here to share some of these experiences with you today including challenges faced by data users and solutions proposed here to address those challenges. Working with Part 45 data makes clear that the swaps market is enormous and very complex. There are lots of trades with many life cycle events, huge notional amounts, complicated counterparty relationships, thousands of products, et cetera. It's a very exciting area of study. The second thing you notice is that although the data is structured and stored in rows and columns, it is sometimes not standardized. When the CFTC adopted the reporting rules in 2012, clear standards did not exist for reporting something as straightforward as, for example, a 3-month LIBOR swap. As a result, the Commission ended up with dozens of different characterizations of the same product in the data. Significant staff time was needed to confirm, for example, that these different characterizations were indeed the same product, and then we had to manually reorganize them. The Commission has produced valuable analysis in products with swap data. Nevertheless, market-wide aggregation and analysis with currently available data is challenging and very labor-intensive. As a data user in the Commission, I've worked on cross-divisional teams of data users to determine, for example, whether a given market participant is above or below the de minimis threshold of $8 billion in gross notional. This analysis required workarounds and filters given the data. Despite the challenges, the Commission has produced reports that are well received by the public, especially including the weekly swaps report and the entity netted notionals reports. These reports are especially valuable to end users like pension funds, insurance companies, and asset managers that previously did not have any view of the risk composition of the markets they were trading in outside of their own activity and maybe the information their dealer counterparties shared with them. From the perspective of a data user, the Part 45 proposal addresses these challenges head on. The proposal standardizes the data elements we collect, and in so doing, will solve many of the issues we struggle with in the data. The harmonized data elements and technical specifications included in this Part 45 proposal reflect lessons learned from years of internal work with the swaps data, external coordination with the international and domestic harmonization efforts, and frequent consultation with market participants. So to summarize, CFTC data users believe the changes in this proposal will provide cleaner, more standardized data that will enhance the Commission's ability to facilitate more accurate, efficient analysis of swaps markets, enable better public reports, policymaking, and market oversight. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next, we'll hear from Kate Mitchell, an IT specialist in the Office of Data and Technology. Today's proposal would propose adopting technical standards for swap data reporting according to CPMI IOSCO technical guidance resulting from several international work streams. CFTC staff has led or participated in each of these efforts. Kate has represented the CFTC on the IOSCO efforts to standardize the data fields, also known as the critical data elements, or CDEs. Kate will provide some background on these efforts and explain their impact on the proposals.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. In 2009, in response to the financial crisis, the G20 leaders agreed that all over-the-counter derivatives should be reported to trade repositories, known as TRs or SDRs in the US, to further the goals of improving transparency, mitigating systemic risk, and preventing market abuse. Since that time, regulators across major derivatives jurisdictions, including the CFTC, have coordinated to develop global guidance on the harmonization of data elements that are reported to TRs and are important for global aggregation. These data elements include what are called other critical data elements, also known as CDE. Under CPMI IOSCO, the CFTC and other regulators developed, sought public consultation on, and then published technical guidance related to over 100 CDE data elements. The technical guidance provides direction to global authorities on how to implement CDE through harmonized or standardized definitions, formats, and usage. The CDE working group was made up of 24 authorities who determined which data elements were critical to harmonize for global aggregation and for conducting market surveillance and enforcement, supervising market participants, and assessing risk, among other important regulatory responsibilities. The CDE technical guidance does not determine which critical data elements are required to be reported in a given jurisdiction, since each authority is responsible for its reporting requirements. Instead, if a jurisdiction adopts a subset of data elements, the guidance provides those authorities with the harmonized definitions, formats, and allowable values for those data elements. Commission staff co-chaired the CPMI IOSCO working groups and also were active members of the working groups, participating in the development of the guidances as well as solicitation and review of responses to multiple public consultations, along with related industry workshops. Commission staff across the CFTC also provided extensive feedback for the data elements, taking into account the Commission's experience with swap data reporting and its use of such data in fulfilling its regulatory responsibilities. Commission staff have now developed a technical specification that outlines the data elements that we believe will be required to be reported to the SDRs under proposed Part 45. The technical specification currently contains 116 data elements. Approximately 2/3 of the data elements in the technical specification are internationally harmonized, while 1/3 are CFTC specific. Staff have determined these CFTC specific data elements are needed to perform the Commission's regulatory responsibilities, and there is not currently a CDE data element that can adequately provide the same information. This technical specification also provides the data elements required to be reported and publicly disseminated under proposed Part 43, including any dissemination requirements for SDRs for public reporting. Staff appreciates the Commission's support in taking the important step of adopting the technical standards.
Thanks, Kate. Next, we'll hear from Richard Moe, a special counsel in DMO's Data and Reporting Branch. Richard has represented the CFTC on a separate IOSCO effort to standardize the unique transaction identifier and also represents the CFTC on the workstream for legal entity identifiers, or LEIs. Richard will provide some background on these efforts and explain their impact on the proposals.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present. The Commission currently requires each swap to be identified with a unique swap identifier, or USI, a proprietary standard developed by the Commission in 2012 in the absence of a uniform global standard. However, Commission staff, including myself, actively participated in international efforts to develop a uniform global standard to identify each swap. These culminated in the Unique Transaction Identifier, or UTI, and the 2017 publication of the UTI Technical Guidance. The technical guidance provides guidance to authorities on the format, generation, and use of UTIs. Even after agreement on how a UTI should be composed, without a harmonized approach on who generates the UTI, there is a risk for multiple UTIs to be generated for a single swap. To address this issue, another key part of the technical guidance is a hierarchy detailing the factors that authorities should consider when drafting their rules governing the entity responsible for generating a UTI for each swap. In the proposed Part 45 revisions, the Commission would, 1, mandate that each new swap be reported with a UTI instead of a USI, 2, provide instructions on how to create the UTI, and 3rd, detail which entity is responsible for generating the UTI for each swap. Commission staff has worked to ensure that the proposed Part 45 revisions conform to and do not conflict with the UTI technical guidance, as global data aggregation would be hindered if multiple UTIs are generated for a swap reportable to multiple jurisdictions. The proposed revisions also aim to ensure that the same UTI reported to another jurisdiction is reported to us. The Financial Stability Board has recommended that all jurisdictions adopt the UTI by the end of this year. The proposed implementation date for the UTI provisions in Part 45 would meet the FSB target. We note that the Commission is among the first authorities to announce its UTI implementation plans, in keeping with the CFTC's vision set by the Chairman of being the global standard for sound derivatives regulation. In addition to identifying transactions, the proposed revisions would also enhance the Commission's ability to identify swap participants. The Commission uses the Legal Entity Identifier, or LEI, to identify counterparties, and CFTC played a crucial role in establishing the LEI in 2013. The CFTC was a founding member of the global LEI system and since the beginning has served on the executive committee of the LEI Regulatory Oversight Committee, or LEI-ROC, a group of authorities from over 50 countries tasked with overseeing the LEI. I currently serve as the CFTC representative to the LEI-ROC. Similar to UTI, a globally accepted identifier for counterparties in the form of the LEI will allow for aggregation of swaps data at a global level and reduce cross-border reporting complexity for participants, as a US firm that obtains an LEI from a US LEI issuer could use that LEI to report to ESMA, just as how a EU firm could report a European-issued LEI to us. The proposed revisions also further reinforce the Commission's commitment to the LEI by requiring those entities posing the most systemic impact to annually renew their LEIs, along with enhancements aimed to ensure that non-reporting counterparties obtain LEIs. Finally, I should mention the future enhanced role of the LEI-ROC. The FSB has recommended that the LEI-ROC, in addition to overseeing LEI, serve as the international governance body for UTI, UPI, and CDE. This transition is expected to occur later this year. When the transition occurs, the governance for the identifiers for each transaction, the counterparties to each transaction, the product in each transaction, and the CDE data elements will all be under one roof, fostering greater collaboration among global authorities to facilitate the effective use of swaps data in assessing systemic risk and detecting market abuse. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. The Commission has to adopt rule changes to implement all of the goals just described. These changes range from updating the list of data fields in Part 45 to amending our transaction identifier rules to adopt the tiebreakers Richard just described. Recognizing that the changes proposed to standardize the data will necessarily involve costs to market participants, we've identified some areas of reporting to streamline to ease reporting burdens where doing so won't sacrifice the Commission's ability to fulfill its responsibilities. Here are some highlights of these changes. The proposal would give swap counterparties more time to report data to SDRs. Under the proposal, we're extending the time to report new swaps or changes to swaps to T+1 or T+2 from the much shorter deadlines we have today. The proposal would require one swap creation data report at execution instead of the two we require today. And the proposal would no longer require end-user reporting counterparties to report quarterly swap valuation data to SDRs. Together, staff believes the Part 45 proposal will harmonize our reporting to international standards, standardize the data for CFTC users, and streamline reporting to reduce burdens for swap counterparties. We look forward to receiving comments on the proposals. Now, staff will present on the Part 43 proposal. The goal of the Part 43 proposal is to standardize the data publicly disseminated by SDRs, propose solutions to two issues we're concerned might be inhibiting the utility of the public tape, and update the regulations related to block trades. To begin, John Roberts, research analyst in the Office of Chief Economist, will discuss the importance of the publicly reported swaps data.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and the Commissioners, for the opportunity to present. Over the course of my 5 years in the Office of the Chief Economist, I have been involved in many projects requiring the use of swaps data. Part 43 is especially interesting to me because my research focuses on how market participants learn from trades and how we can use such information to study market liquidity. The Dodd-Frank Act placed emphasis on increasing transparency in the swaps market and, to that end, mandated that data on swaps transactions be made public. Commission staff involved in these proposals believe that one way to achieve the CFTC's mission of promoting the integrity, resilience, and vibrancy of the U.S. derivatives markets through sound regulation of derivatives is to ensure that these markets are transparent both in terms of products traded and individual executions. The CFTC's initial work on Part 43 created what we believe is the most truly transparent swaps market, consistent with the CFTC's core value of transparency. As Part 43's name suggests, the primary intended use of Part 43 data is real-time monitoring of swaps markets. Professional traders rely on public data to watch the market. With Part 43, market participants can watch the price discovery process and collect information, allowing dealers to quote more accurate prices to clients and clients to determine when to accept or reject quotes during the negotiation process. The real-time streaming nature of the data opens new opportunities to apply big data technologies and to integrate swaps market information with other financial data in near real time. This can lead to market participants making more informed trading decisions, which in turn can lead to improved price discovery. The value of Part 43 data also extends beyond the use in real time. It allows practitioners and academics access to historical intraday market information. For example, private entities such as Claris and FIA regularly study Part 43 data and publish results of their findings. Further, academic research using the public data has found that increase in market transparency has improved the market. This information will continue to be useful for researchers studying market liquidity and price discovery in swaps markets. Lastly, we expect under the proposed rule changes that the quality of the data will improve as harmonized fields will capture details of trades and products in a uniform fashion, which we believe will increase the usefulness and user-friendliness of the Part 43 data. In conclusion, following the mandates outlined in the Dodd-Frank Act, the CFTC created Part 43 to increase market transparency. Since its inception and to this day, the CFTC is the leader in swaps market transparency. This information is used by professional traders and dealers to monitor the market and collect information that helps them make better trading decisions. It also creates opportunities for technological innovations, which can improve how the swaps markets function. Finally, this information is used by researchers and data scientists to gain market insights and help them inform the general public, which leads to more informed market participants. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Now we'll hear from David Aaron, Special Counsel and DMO, on two of the specific Part 43 proposals for post-price swaps and prime brokerage transactions.
Thanks, Megan. First, I'll discuss post-price swaps, which is primarily an equity swap product. The proposed definition of a post-price swap is a swap for which the price is unknown at execution. The price is unknown because it's contingent on a subsequent event or activity, such as the determination of a broad-based stock index level later in the day, or a swap dealer completing a post-price swap hedge. As background, Part 43 generally requires swap reporting to SDRs as soon as technologically practicable after execution. However, some market participants are concerned that ASATP reporting allows other market participants to negatively impact the eventual post-price swap price. Proposed Rule 43.3A4 would permit delaying the reporting of all Part 43 post-price swap data until the earlier of the price being determined and just before midnight Eastern Time on the execution date. If the price is not determined by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, the reporting counterparty would have to, 1, report to an SDR by that time all Part 43 data for the post-price swap, other than the price and any other than unknown Part 43 data, and report each previously unknown data point to an SDR ASATP after such data point is determined. When the known post-price swap data is reported by the deadline, it would be flagged so it could be displayed on the public tape as such. It appears that post-price swaps constitute a significant portion of swaps reported on a delayed basis. Therefore, by permitting post-price swap reporting to be delayed until the proposed deadline, late reporting should be substantially reduced. Staff understands that delaying Part 43 post-price swap reporting until the proposed deadline would address over 90% of the post-price swap problem. The purpose of Part 43 reporting is to enhance price discovery. However, reporting post-price swaps ASATP after execution without a price doesn't serve that goal optimally. As a result, we've drafted proposed Rule 43.3A4 to further that purpose. We will now turn to mirror swaps, which I will describe briefly in a moment. Proposed Rule 43.3A6 states that prime brokerage transactions defined as mirror swaps would not be Part 43 reportable. Although mirror swaps aren't currently addressed in Part 43,
DMO previously provided conditional no action relief from certain Part 43 requirements in 2012, and the proposed requirements would in part be based on that relief. By way of background, a mirror swap is part of a larger transaction structure. In these structures, a prime broker enters into an agreement with its customer, authorizing it, as agent for the prime broker, to cause the execution of a swap to which the prime broker and a third party would be counterparties, which we're proposing to call a trigger swap, with the swap terms and counterparties falling within specified parameters. We define the completion of the negotiation of the material economic terms and pricing of the trigger swap as the pricing event, which I'll come back to later. Under the proposal, a mirror swap would be defined as a swap that, among other things, is executed contemporaneously with a corresponding trigger swap and, with one exception, has identical terms and pricing as the related trigger swap, except for the inclusion of prime brokerage fees in the mirror swap. As for the exception, in more complicated prime broker transaction structures, the notional of the mirror swaps in the structure may differ from the notional of the corresponding trigger swap. However, in those cases, each prime broker would still have a flat market risk position. Because the terms and pricing of a trigger swap and its related mirror swaps are the same, reporting both or all under Part 43 could falsely indicate the occurrence of two or more pricing events and overstate the price discovery activity that's actually occurring. Although mirror swaps would not be reported pursuant to Part 43 under the proposal, they would be reported pursuant to Part 45 and identified as mirror swaps, so the Commission would still have data available for the mirror swaps. As for trigger swaps, the proposal would require Part 43 reporting ASATP after related pricing event and identifying trigger swaps as such so that they would be flagged on the public tape to signal the existence of one or more related mirror swaps. Trigger swaps would also have to be reported pursuant to Part 45, and reporting parties would have to indicate in those reports that the trigger swaps and mirror swaps are related. As a result, the Commission would have a complete picture of the swaps resulting from each pricing event. We believe these proposals for post-price swaps and mirror swaps are a practical way to address long-standing Part 43 reporting issues, while also ensuring that accurate, non-misleading data for these swaps are still available to the public and the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Now we'll hear from Matt Jones, Special Counsel in DMO, to discuss the proposed changes to block reporting rules.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and the Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. We are proposing to revise the block trade rule primarily to better target those large trades that merit block treatment, and to change the dissemination delay for reporting block trades to give market participants more time to place a hedge position after entering into a block-sized trade. We are proposing to update which swaps are subject to block treatment because the current requirements do not reflect the current levels of activity on the swaps market and do not incorporate new insights we have gained from reviewing the reported swaps data. Current Part 43 set the block size in 2013 based on trade data and volumes from 2010. The Commission necessarily developed the current block trade rules without the benefit of Parts 43 and 45 data. The proposed block trade rule benefits from extensive analysis of the swaps data reported pursuant to Parts 43 and 45. In particular, two of our analysts, Greg Stovall and Kristen Legal, reviewed over 24 months of data to inform our proposed changes to the block trade rule, and performed ongoing analysis to confirm the robustness of these recommendations. As we considered the proposal to extend the reporting delay, we especially wanted to tailor our block treatment to those trades that create a liquidity concern. With a delay that is 15 minutes, we consider the market impact relatively minimal if a set of trades receives or does not receive block treatment. However, with a block delay that is 2 days, we believe that being over-inclusive in our block trade definition could make the swaps market unnecessarily opaque. To better target trades that merit block treatment, we propose to create more granular swap categories that separate swaps based on similar levels of liquidity, and to update the block size and cap sizes based on the 67% notional and 75% notional calculations. By making the swap categories more granular, we believe that we can better target large trades by product market. At times, the current swap categories bucket distinctive products together to calculate a single minimum block size. For example, we block IRS swaps for US dollars, euros, UK pound sterling, and Japanese yen together. Since the volume of US dollar IRS swaps traded on US markets is significantly larger than these other currencies, US dollar IRS swaps have an overwhelming impact on their swap categories' block size thresholds. Consequently, the resulting block sizes are too large for Japanese yen IRS and too small for US dollar IRS. Less than 2% of Japanese yen 46-day to 3-month IRS are currently eligible for block treatment. By separating the swap categories based on currency, each swap product benefits from its more closely tailored block threshold. Finally, we propose to update the block size and cap sizes based on recently calculated 67% notional and 75% notional amounts for each of the proposed swap categories, which we believe is necessary when the trade volume for products in a swap category change. We also propose to modify the current dissemination delay for block trades to 48 hours because we are concerned that the current delay may be insufficient for market makers and other market participants to place a hedged position without paying a significant premium. Market participants have requested various delay times, and we are interested in considering these and others submitted as part of the comment process for purposes of the final rule. These requests have included maintaining the 15-minute time delay or extending the 15-minute time delay for various periods, such as 4 or 8 hours until the end of day, 24 hours, 48 hours, or much longer. Based on discussions with market participants, we believe that traders generally seek to hedge their portfolios before the close of business on the day a swap is executed. This is because the risk of unfavorable price movement after a large swap is executed typically dissuades market participants from significantly delaying their swap hedging with the goal of executing their hedge is later at a lower cost. We propose to extend the delay to 48 hours for all block trades as a conservative measure to account for potential situations when a market participant requires additional time and to create more consistency with the disclosure requirements in the European Union for non-liquid swaps. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I will also highlight for Part 43 that we're proposing to finally have the Part 43 data fields be a subset of the Part 45 data fields. Staff hopes that standardizing Part 43 and 45 together will help standardize the public data to improve the public's ability to use it across SDRs. This concludes staff presentations on the Part 43 and Part 45 proposals. Now, Ben DeMaria, Special Counsel in DMO's Data and Reporting Branch, will quickly remind everyone why we are reopening the comment period for the Commission's Part 49 proposal from this past spring.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm here presenting today as the lead author for the first of the roadmap proposals, which we released in 2019 and is commonly known as the Verification NPRM. The Verification NPRM focused on data verification and correction requirements for the SDRs and market participants, amongst other issues. It's intended to work in tandem with the other two proposals that my colleagues have just described, as all three constitute the roadmap rulemaking trilogy, which I think we can all agree is the best trilogy to have it released anything in 2019. It's also a perfect example, the presentation is also a perfect example of how the roadmap proposals are intended to work in tandem. Because the third item the Commission will be voting on today is the reopening of the comment period for the Verification NPRM. As we stated in the NPRM release and in the most recent comment extension, we intended to reopen the comment period to allow market participants and the public to comment on all of the roadmap rules. True to our word, today's reopening of the comment period is explicitly designed for commenters to be able to comment on all three proposals as they may choose, be that altogether or individually. The comment period would also overlap for the same exact amount of time with the comment periods for the two new proposals. As described in the release being voted on today, all comment letters previously submitted for the verification NPRM are still valid and will be reviewed as part of the public comment process. Market participants and the public can amend any previous comments, submissions, or submit new comments if they so choose, but they are not required to do so in order for their original comments to be addressed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to our staff for that informative presentation. To begin the Commission's discussion and consideration of these rulemakings, I'll now entertain a motion to adopt the proposed rules, amending Parts 43 and 45, and reopening the comment period for Part 49.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Commissioners' questions and statements. We'll go in order of seniority, so I'll be first. I only have a few questions, and my questions are related to Part 43. And then I'll briefly outline my reasons for supporting the rule. Just to sort of set the stage here, I just want to make certain that I understand this. You guys have been working on this collectively since, what, 2012? Is that what you said, since the sort of the first set of rules came out? Anybody can answer that. Right.
I'll answer that. It's fair to say that we have been working on this since the implementation period for the original rules, because we were addressing feedback from market participants, addressing issues that came up during that process, and continue to take feedback throughout that entire period. We also had more formal discussions with other regulators, market participants, and within the building as well. We've talked about a number of those initiatives. More specifically, we had a 2014 request for comment that data factored very heavily in. There was a 2015 request for comment specifically on data fields. We've done the cleared swaps reporting rulemaking in 2016. There's the indemnification rulemaking, which is about sharing data between regulators. We announced the roadmap in 2017. We've had all of the harmonization work on the international level since around that time, and then we have today's proposals. These specific proposals, they were in their infancy around 2015, and then really kicked off in the last few years. All of this obviously took a long time, which is why I went through that whole list, because we wanted to get things right, and we wanted to make sure everything was harmonized, and we wanted to make sure everything works. And all of the coordination and research and effort that's required does take a long time, but we're honestly really immensely proud of what we're proposing today because it reflects all of that work and all of that time, and we think it's going to be a huge leap forward for the data quality for the Commission and for the market participants that are in our markets.
So while this appears very technical in nature for those that are here in the audience and maybe watching via webcast, to summarize it, I would just say it's kind of a big deal, right? We've been working on this now for arguably 8 years, but certainly on crystal proposals for at least 5 years. And this is absolutely critical to ensuring that our markets get the information they need and that we as a regulator get the information we need.
Yes, it is a big deal.
Thank you. And then the other aspect of this, which I think is relatively unique among our rulemakings, apart from the length of time and the amount of staff effort, is the fact that we've been coordinating with other regulators on this. And I think someone mentioned, I forget who, maybe it was you, Richard, that we sit on the committee and there are 50 other jurisdictions represented. Is that right? On the LEI ROC?
Yes, the LEI ROC is composed of approximately 90 members from over 50 countries.
Wow, so over 50 countries, and then in particular, we've been working with the SEC, which I think is really important to make sure we're together with them, as well as with major jurisdictions, including the European Union.
That's correct.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for all your work. I don't think today's proposals are particularly controversial, particularly Part 45. We have a system that I think, we were the first out the door to get it up and running. It obviously needed a great deal of work, and we've spent the time and effort over the last number of years in making that work, and we're proposing efforts to improve it. I think in particular, I want to focus on Part 43. So when I think of Part 43, I do think of the CFTC and our Part 43 regime as being the global standard. It's absolutely critical that we have public transparency. And I know I have said this, that I'm sort of Mr. Transparency, as it were, in terms of what the agency's doing. This agency voted as a whole to make transparency one of our four core values. And transparency is obviously important in the agency, but it's just as important, if not far more important, for our markets. So, one of the things that I think I'm still giving a great deal of thought to is as how we're handling reporting delays for certain of the things under Part 43. I think from my standpoint, post-trade pricing, that makes sense to me. Putting out information to the public that doesn't have pricing data, that to me doesn't make sense. It's not a whole useful. Plus, I think as you mentioned, people can undercut that and try to drive up or drive down the eventual price of the equity. Mirror swaps, that makes sense to me as well. I think the real issue is double counting. We don't want market participants to look at this data and get the sense that there are actually twice as many transactions as there really are. Because ultimately what people want to know is, what's the arm's length negotiated for bargain of a particular swap. And so when you include mirror trades, it looks like there's double, maybe even more than actual swaps in the market that represent an actual transaction, arm's length transaction. I think we do have to think seriously about how we're handling the reporting delay for block trades. We want high quality data to be reported as quickly as possible. And we do recognize there are some situations that may require a delay, but I want to be very clear to everyone who's watching that this is an area we want to get right. We want to encourage comment letters and feedback. We're looking very seriously at this issue and will continue to do so. I think this proposal, the expert judgment of staff. And as a result, I would just want to ask a few questions just so I fully understand the proposal, how we got to where we are, and also that the audience can understand that as well. So, when I think of why we have a potential reporting delay for block trades, and this question will be for you, Matt, basically it's this. We want market makers to be able to supply swaps, particularly to end users. We want them to be able, and end users often need a large position. Someone comes and it's an insurance company, they have interest rate risk. They come to a swap dealer and they say, we need a big position. The swap dealer, of course, works with their client to get them that big position. And then the concern is if they report it immediately or, within 15 minutes, they won't be able to then hedge that position. And as a result, if that continues to occur, then I guess the swap dealer, there'll be a disincentive to supply swaps for hedging tools for end users. Is that sort of the basic gist here?
Yes, that's the basic gist. To the extent that an end user is trying to put up a big position, they're likely to, if they cannot find a market maker that's comfortable with putting up a hedge quickly, they might find themselves having to pay a premium in the market to the price of a smaller trade. And so that could dissuade them from taking on that large block position. It effectively becomes less liquid for them at those large sizes.
And I think you mentioned that most of the hedging occurs within the same business day or within the close of business on the same day. Is that based on what we know about how the market operates?
Yes, based on how we know it operates, and there's surely examples where there are exceptions to this rule, but generally a trader and a trading desk, when they take on a position that they're intending to hedge, they're not intending to go home until they have it hedged, because there can be fundamental changes with the underlying products that overwhelm any change due to a liquidity concern from trying to hedge that position that day. So they're going to want to close out that risk before they go home.
And so in your view, I guess the 48 hours, that gives sufficient time or more than sufficient time?
In our view, it gives more than sufficient time. We could imagine some situations where perhaps someone puts up initially an imperfect hedge, and they've done that on day one, and at the same time they're trying to put up a better hedge, and perhaps so with that imperfect hedge, they've limited their risk, and perhaps they're looking to take on get a little bit more time to put on their perfect hedge position. So there's some unusual situations like that we want to be.
And so I guess what I'm wondering, and this is something I think I'd like to hear public comment on, and I'd like to discuss this more with my fellow commissioners as we embark on this comment period, is if, maybe all swaps are not created equal in terms of liquidity, in terms of their ability to clear. You guys, I think, acknowledge that, in that if it falls into one of these buckets, then, the 48-hour delay takes place. But I guess what I'm wondering is could we consider the possibility of maybe having block delays shorter than 48 hours for certain types of swaps? Swaps that really shouldn't need an imperfect hedge initially, where you can go ahead and hedge that exposure more quickly. So I guess that the question is just simply, would the staff consider the possibility, or is it a possibility in your view, your technical expertise, where we could have sufficient time for certain swaps that are fewer than 48 hours, if they're cleared, if they're more liquid?
Yes, I think that's definitely something we would consider. For purposes of the rule and getting comments, we thought it was simpler to come out with a single time delay.
And I believe that single time delay is not just sort of specific. Doesn't ESMA, other jurisdictions have a similar time delay?
Yes, and this is to get us a little bit more consistent with the European Union, which this is probably, you could say it's their initial time delay. I think that they do have more than one.
Okay, great. Well, no, I appreciate that. Like I said, this is an amazing proposal. It represents so much work for so many years, and I think it's fantastic to get it out there for a proposal. It is not in any way, shape, or form going to be the final version as we consider comments to it, but I think it represents a tremendous effort, and I look forward to hearing all the public comments, particularly on the block trade part of it, and then hopefully finalizing it later this year. So I just want to say that I fully support today's proposals. I think they'll simplify swap data reporting. They'll provide greater regulatory harmonization. They will enhance public transparency. And then finally, they'll give relief for end users. So I'm pleased to support this proposal. And with that, I will turn to Commissioner Quintens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you and the staff described well the balance in the rule, in the proposal, between providing the market with sufficient real-time data for price discovery purposes, while also acknowledging the risk that exists to liquidity and to counterparties with letting a certain amount of that information out too quickly. That will lead to higher costs or lower liquidity. And for some trades in the rule, the standard that was described as soon as technologically practical will still be the standard for reporting in real time. Is that correct? Someone just...
Yes, the overall standard will remain as soon as technologically practicable.
And in terms of, the scope of trades to which that term applies in this proposal compared to the status quo environment, do we expect it to be about the same, more, or less? I guess a different way of asking that question is, as we've calibrated the block sizes, what's the universe that we expect those thresholds to apply?
So with the new block thresholds, we expect that there'll be many more trades that are not blocked than before. Not to say that there weren't an overwhelming number that were necessarily being blocked, but we were at P50% for our prior calculation for the block threshold. And then we also had some that were determined that were in still the initial period. And so as we move up to the P67 percentage for the calculation and we update for today's numbers, we expect that all of the block sizes are going to be moving higher generally. There could be some exceptions that we didn't look at specifically.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So there's a realistic outcome or scenario where the as soon as technologically practicable standard, in some cases which is as soon as seconds of execution, will apply to a larger percentage of trades than it does now in the marketplace, therefore increasing the amount of actual real-time data that exists in the swaps market. That's a potential outcome of this proposal.
Yes, I think that would be the outcome, and it'd be that we all expect. There are a few different swap categories that are particularly low liquidity that are completely blocked, but those are basically in situations where the trades are maybe 1 or 2 a month or things like that.
Okay, thank you. And could we just discuss for a second how this proposal compares to the EU's real-time reporting? We mentioned that briefly, but it's my understanding that the EU has a higher threshold for what it considers a liquid product, or conversely, a lower threshold for illiquid products, that more products qualify, more trades qualify for block trades, and that the reporting delays can span anywhere between 48 hours and 4 weeks. Is that accurate?
That's an accurate portrayal of their rules.
Okay, so even though in a more narrow set of circumstances we are moving to a potential 48-hour reporting threshold, there exists the opportunity in Europe for some trades to be reported over 4 weeks after execution.
Yes, and I would note that they just announced a public consultation on their real-time reporting rules as well. So I think we will benefit from their experience in this venue, and our comments will hopefully inform theirs as well.
Thank you for bringing that up. I was going to encourage continued effort, which I know there is and has long been, of resolving the potential ongoing regulatory arbitrage outcomes of whatever we do versus whatever exists out there. So thank you for that. Megan, you might be the best person to answer this because I think you described it before, but could you go again through the statutory requirements of real-time reporting and the description of what the Commission should consider in terms of block trades?
Sure. So Section 2813 of the Commodity Exchange Act directs the Commission to provide for the public availability of swap transaction and pricing data. The Act defines real-time public reporting as swap transaction and pricing data reported as soon as technologically practicable after execution. But there's a caveat that in doing so and providing for this data to the public, the Commission has to ensure that the public data does not identify the swap counterparties, provides a time delay for these outsized swap transaction, and accounts for whether the public disclosure of the delay will materially reduce market liquidity. So that's where the block threshold comes from.
Okay, thank you. So there is an acknowledgement in the statute that block trades exist and that they are beneficial to participants in the market under certain circumstances, and in the strict adherence to a real-time reporting threshold would be detrimental to those, and therefore lists other criteria that we need to consider in establishing what the reporting regime needs to be there. And again, I think it comes back to the idea of a balance where we want to ensure that trades are reported as quickly as possible to provide the marketplace with that price discovery, but not impede the liquidity that should exist for viable purposes that increases costs or dissuades market participants from using this market for hedging purposes.
Yes, the commission has to consider those criteria for those reasons.
Okay, and I'm very pleased to acknowledge and agree with the chairman's perception that the thresholds we have in front of us are based off of your own expert judgments in looking at the data and looking at the marketplace over the last number of years. I think any of us can have opinions about what those thresholds should be. It would be nice if those opinions were based on the data that you use. So I would encourage anyone that comments on changing those thresholds to use data in their analysis. I guess lastly, Megan, you and I have talked about this before. I know that the chairman and the chairman prior to him have been very focused on SEC coordination and harmonization. I've been very pleased to help support that effort. I know this has been a rule that has had a particular focus of coordination with the SEC. Could you describe a little bit about the length and the detail of those conversations and how interested they have been and their reactions to and feedback into this rule?
So the initial harmonization effort started about 18 months ago when your office announced it. And since then, we've worked with them on sharing information on the fields we're going to be proposing today and the technical specifications associated with those fields. The SEC works very closely with us on all of these international harmonization efforts. So we hope that they'll follow our example in the future of adopting many of the same similar CDE fields. And we've also shared the proposals for their feedback, and we've appreciated all of their support and help in these efforts.
And so because these are technical specifications, these would serve the underlying purpose for an SDR to build a platform and a reporting regime, using. So it's not a form that we demand participants fill out. It's a technical specification for SDRs to construct their own reporting regime. So if the SEC agrees with and possibly adds some fields to what we have produced, there's a scenario that an SDR could provide one interface to market participants to report either security-based swaps or swaps directly.
Yes, especially in light of the jurisdictional product differences, I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. Very pleased to support it today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Quintens. Commissioner Benham.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to all the staff for your presentations across the two divisions. I'm going to pile on here on block trading, but before I ask a few questions, I do want to recognize my support for your comments, Mr. Chairman. I do have concern about the 48-hour reporting proposal. I do think it arguably flies in the face of the major intent of Dodd-Frank and more specifically Title VII about transparency. I appreciate certainly Commissioner Quintens' comments about the balance that we need to find, which is very difficult given the statutory requirements of appreciating the need for block trades, but also understanding and appreciating the sort of countervailing interests of market transparency and integrity and efficiency. So just a couple things, because I know a couple of the questions have already been asked, but I do want to highlight a few things, and I am also very encouraged by the fact that we are, although proposing this based on data that the division is presenting, open to comments from the public and their suggestions of what the best path forward is as we look towards a final rule in the coming months. Matt, you very succinctly sort of articulated the potential negative consequences of having a short reporting period where a dealer would not be able to hedge risk that it took on with an end user, suggesting the chairman's hypothetical. What are the potential risks of having an extended or a longer reporting period? Let's use 48 hours in this case, where you're going to have, in some circumstances, a large gap. Is there a potential for sort of price mismatch or some negative consequence that you are and having to balance with the issues about not being able to hedge risk.
Sure. So as you look at the data, you'll see that we expect that in most cases, the block threshold should block, it's a pretty wide range, but between 2 and 5% of a swap category. And so there is a lot of trades that are coming through that are providing pricing information for participants. As you look at swap categories that have fewer trades, the numbers can change, especially when you're not looking at it over a year, but maybe over a week period or a month period. You could find that you get an unusually large number of block trades. You could also find that the block trades are exclusively being done by, say, Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. And so maybe someone who is a price leader and is informing the other market participants is completely blocked for all of their trades. And that could also be disadvantageous for other people because they're not getting the best information. They're getting the information from the less sophisticated market participants.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and I think it's something that I think we should consider, again, as a countervailing point to some of these costs and benefits and some of the risks that, whether intended or not, we would be potentially embracing or bringing on if we go down this road of a 48-hour reporting period. Not everything is clean and black or white. There's certainly gray areas, and we have to, I think, as a commission, consider all the factors, but also keeping in mind, again, as I mentioned, the Title VII mandate and what our statute requires us to do in sort of supporting transparent markets and, above all else, to your point, Matt, accurate and transparent pricing for market participants, both big and small. Second point I'd like to talk about, Megan, and this might be for you, the EU, you've mentioned, obviously, their work in this space, and they currently, correct me if I'm wrong, but they currently have, for block trades, a 48-hour reporting period for at least some asset classes.
Yeah, the main reporting delay is 48 hours.
So, and you may have addressed this in part with your discussion with Commissioner Quintens, but in our conversations with them, have we asked or do we get a sense of how that's working and whether or not it's achieving its goal that they initially intended?
So we haven't engaged with them specifically on Part 43 yet, but I think since they've got their consultation open now, I think we would probably try and start those dialogues.
Thanks. That'd be great. I would encourage that. I think certainly as a sort of second mover in this space, it would be helpful for us to be able to glean some of what they've learned in their efforts. Lastly, the SEC, and I don't know, the answer to this might be no, but the SEC through its Fixed Income Market Structure Advisory Committee, the FIMSAC, deliberated a 48-hour trading rule for fixed income products, so different set of products, and they put out a pilot review, and then it was either withdrawn or put on hold. Was the deliberation, the data, the conversation around that conversation and proposal ever considered? And I say that in light of course, above all else, it's good to learn from our regulators and harmonize and coordinate, which I know we do. But this was specifically an issue that I think is interesting because there certainly is an alignment between what we're trying to accomplish and what they were trying to accomplish in the fixed income space. And given some of the criticism from buy-side, sell-side firms about both liquidity and the ability to sort of enter the market and enter into transactions, but the downside risk was pricing and unfair advantage for some of the larger players in the market space. And again, I don't know if that would be perfectly aligned with what we're dealing with in the swap space, but certainly something I would hope we dig into a little bit so that we could learn from what they've learned, but also some mistakes that they may have made.
I think we'll consider that, and at one point we had considered a similar study, but we decided to move forward with a proposal instead, and we hope that the preamble, addresses all the different range of feedback we've gotten, and we get good comments from there.
Great, thank you. So moving on to two more questions, and I don't know, Roger Smith was the CEF no action relief staff, and I know Roger's in Chicago probably watching right now, but Dorothy, you were at the table with him, I guess, on January 30th when we had that meeting to finalize, or to propose some of those, propose codifying some of the no action relief. But, and we can talk about this separately if it's not something we can answer right now, but in that proposal, one of the provisions was to eliminate the occurs away language in the definition of block trade. Megan, you're nodding your head, so I'm hopeful you can answer this. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the underlying policy intent was to incentivize more trading on platform, on CEF, and moving trades away from blocks. And if that is in fact the case, is that sort of, is there a discrepancy with what we're doing with the 48-hour trade reporting rule and the sort of occurs away that we proposed last month with the no action relief?
I think in terms of execution, we've worked with Roger to make sure that our proposal is consistent with his. But in terms of the effects on execution, I think we've been more focused on the reporting side. But I don't know if anyone else has any insight into that.
So in terms of the change to permit trading on a CEF, the proposal is now considering that you could actually execute a block trade on a CEF. So it wouldn't really impact the location. It's more agnostic to the location where someone's deciding to do the trade.
That's helpful. One other point I want to make, and I'm going to shift now to part 45, but there's a little bit of connection to 43. And I think, Megan, you may have spoken with my staff before this meeting, and I think it's a little bit of a technical thing, and I only bring it up as a matter of the public hearing about it because it's important as they review these rules, they understand some discrepancies that were unintentionally in there, but that I think the intent or plan is to fix. But the discrepancy between 43 and 45 and the form and manner of reporting and the public dissemination of the swap transaction and data, there's something in the preamble, but it's not in the rule text. I think in 43, but in 45, it's in both the preamble and the rule text. So I just want to confirm if you're aware of that. And it's the delegation that the commission's giving to the director that we have these things aligned between 43 and 45.
So both delegations are in the current Part 43 and Part 45 rules, and they're staying in the Part 43 and Part 45 rules. Both delegations get us to the same point, and we're proposing to update both of them consistent with the changes to the rules in both proposals. If there's a discrepancy in the preamble, I'm sure we can explain it in the final and hopefully resolve any confusion.
Thanks. And then my last two questions, and John, these might be for you. And I think they're going to be helpful for the public to understand some of the work that you've been doing across different divisions and from a sort of market data standpoint, how important these rules are and what they enable us from a surveillance standpoint, from a risk management standpoint, both from OCE and the different divisions. But in the 45 proposal, in the cost-benefit analysis, there's a suggestion that the negative effects of data discrepancies in swap information has essentially prohibited us from doing our job sort of at the best that we could do. So if you could give us a little bit of flavor of how, when hopefully we finalize this rule and we smooth out some of these data fields and the standardization becomes a little bit cleaner, both in-house and then across agencies domestically and globally. What is this analysis going to enable you to do better? How is it going to sort of empower the agency to be better at its in its oversight role? And how will the market benefit from that as well?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there are a couple pieces, I guess. First is the benefit of standardization, right? So the ambiguity of the original rules created just like with the example I used in the initial statement is we have, 3-month LIBOR swaps characterized a bunch of different ways. We have to sort of manually recategorize those. So the new rules will fix a lot of those kinds of basic data problems that were there in the data. And then there's, there are some conceptual challenges for rules like, the de minimis rule is a tough one because there are a lot of categories that are just not in the data that we have to add separately, which is, that's always going to be there, I think. And then third, we're bringing in some things like, collateral and margin fields that are going to allow us to more directly address things like collateral and margin rules and systemic risk that was not there before. So
Are we going to have to change anything from an infrastructure standpoint, or is this just a sort of reprogramming of what we receive and how we receive it?
possibly, I mean, we're, if in a lot of ways it'll make our infrastructure challenges a little easier because we're going to be bringing in cleaner, more standard data from the 3 different SDRs at the moment, right? This is all part of ODT's move to the cloud anyway, so it'll probably coincide with that. But there will definitely be some database changes for sure.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your efforts on this. And again, thank you to DMO, thank you to OCE for your hard work, and thanks to OGC, of course. Echoing Ben's statement and yours, this is a big deal, and I appreciate the years-long effort and something that I'm happy to support. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Benham. Commissioner Stump.
Well, I wasn't going to ask any questions, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to again highlight all the positives. And I too have interest in the block issue, but I wanted to perhaps give you guys another opportunity to talk about all the positives. And in particular, when we did Part 49 last summer, I was somewhat critical of doing it in advance to Part 43 and Part 45 because to me, these are all a puzzle. They fit together. They're supposed to work cohesively. So I'm wondering if maybe with each individual who's responsible for specific data sets talking about them on an individual basis, if it might be worthwhile to discuss a bit how all of these data sets are designed to provide more efficiency, not just for the agency, because we know that we hope that's going to be the case, but also for the reporting counterparties and the infrastructure, the SDRs. So again, maybe this is just an opportunity if you want to address how that is going to all fit together and make for a better outcome.
Thanks. So the Part 45 proposal today will give clear instructions on what market participants have to report to SDRs. SDRs should then have clear instructions on the data they'll be receiving and how to validate it. The Part 49 proposal from the spring will instruct reporting counterparties how to check the data and how often and how to correct errors. And the Part 43 proposal will benefit from the standardization of the Part 45 proposal by combining the 2 data sets.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I could add one little thing to that, also related to Commissioner Benham's recent question. There's a lot of other issues from the main ones that we're dealing with, including giving the Commission the flexibility and the ability to say, this is how you send things to us, this is when you need to do things, including how to send us data from the SDRs in the proposal from last year.
Thank you. Again, I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to highlight all the positives. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stump. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think this has been a very illuminating and helpful discussion on some of these issues, and I'm going to have some additional questions. But I do want to echo the sentiment that Commissioner Stump just expressed. So I'm going to be focusing on the issues as I see them. So what I'm not asking about, in my mind, are positive aspects of the proposal. There are a lot of positive aspects in both the Part 43 proposal and the Part 45 proposal, and we'll get comments on those. But I think the more granularity in terms of the types of blocks is a positive development. I think some of the changes to not have duplicative reporting and to clean up some of those issues are significant improvements, and therefore that's why I do support putting this out for a proposal. Nonetheless, I do have a significant concern with the reporting delay on the block trades. Just to clarify what we're talking about here, on a block trade, the two counterparties is typically what we're talking about in a block trade, a dealer and a non-dealer? Is that, or are there potentially two non-dealers? What percentage of these blocks involve dealers as a counterparty?
I would say that it is, well, I don't have percentages in front of me by any means, but if I was just giving you a guess, if I'm allowed to do so, I
Sure.
would say well over 95%
So
involve a dealer
dealers.
on one
Okay.
side, on one side at least.
Okay, so, and we've talked about the trade-offs here and the balance that we need to achieve. The dealers are the ones who provide the liquidity. The dealers, when they do a block, they're not taking positions. They want to be ultimately flat, so they have to hedge. So the dealers have a clear interest in a longer time delay in terms of being able to hedge. The dealers also have an interest in a longer time delay in market opacity. They have an information advantage. They're the ones, they know the price of the block that they've done. They know the price, but nobody else knows, and they know the price of the blocks they've just done, but if there's a time delay, no other market participants will have that knowledge. They have an information advantage. Is that correct, that the dealers, when they do these blocks, have an information advantage over other market participants until that time is reported?
Yes, I mean, they're aware of that particular block trade that was executed, and unless, well, depending on their relationship with the counterparty, it's possible that counterparty shopped the block trade around. Many counterparties will go to two dealers, even for a block trade. So these are ongoing relationships, and they're relying on that to not have that dealer then go out in the market and steal all or take the supply ahead of them if they don't go with them. But generally, they have an advantage in that particular trade
Sure.
that most of the market does not have.
Okay, and on the other side, the end users, I think it's been articulated, the end user's interest is getting a fair price. They want to know, when they do a block, they want to be getting the market price for that. They also have an interest in the dealer on the other side of the transaction generally being able to hedge so that the dealer is not building in an additional cost of the hedge, so that they don't want to have the price that the end user doesn't want to have the price that they're getting have to be built in some dealer expense for hedging. So the end user wants to achieve the correct balance in terms of the time delay and the price discovery. Is that correct? Okay, so let me, so there's the countervailing. Dealers like opacity, end users like transparency, but the end users want sufficient time delay so that they can get the dealers don't have to charge them too much for the cost of hedging. Let me ask, it's been talked about the European 48-hour delay or the European delay. What significance is that to us? I mean, we've got our market that we do. Why should we, what relevance is the fact that the Europeans have a different or have a specific rule?
I think in all the factors we consider, we always consider harmonization as a potential benefit. And if it ends up not being a potential benefit, then we wouldn't necessarily propose harmonizing. So at least raising the option and raising their time delay, I think, will benefit the proposal by getting public feedback on that aspect of it.
But it wouldn't necessarily harm our market if we were to adopt a different time delay.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Are there currently products under the current structure, under our current rule, that are less than 48 hours reported that would move under the rule to 48 hours delay?
There are some products in our rule that may move under the delay in that we are changing the swap categories. So previously we would have bucketed some things together into a larger bucket. And now that we make the buckets more specific to each product, you could see that you're getting, say before you were getting 3% of this very large bucket, but that 3% was all of the US IRS trades, which is the example I gave. But when you break that bucket up into Japanese yen, pound sterling, US dollars, then suddenly Japanese yen, maybe there are some trades in Japanese yen that now will receive block treatment under their own block threshold that previously were getting none because they were, or close to zero because those trades are just all at a lower volume.
Okay, I'm not sure I've followed. There are these things that are currently not blocks that would become.
Well, so
I thought there's.
There'll be overall there will be fewer
Block.
trades subject to block treatment.
Okay.
However, when you break up the swap categories, currently the swap categories group a lot of trades together, and so U.S. IRS trades tend to trade in larger volumes than Japanese yen IRS trades on our U.S. markets. So when you're looking at which trades are subject to block treatment, they tend to all be U.S., especially in the shorter term tenors, they tend to all be U.S. dollar trades because it just so happens that the 50 biggest trades every month are U.S. dollar trades. And to the extent that there's no Japanese yen trade that makes that top 100 list of biggest trades, then they're never getting a block trade. They're never getting block treatment for any of their trades. When we split those buckets up, we raise the block thresholds generally, but now there would be some Japanese yen trades that we would expect would have the opportunity for block treatment.
So there would be new category. There's, I guess, a couple things. One, there's new categories of blocks, things that weren't blocks under the current rule that will become blocks under the new rule. That's that.
Yes, that's true because of the breaking up of the swap categories to make them more granular.
Okay, so all those would now have a 48-hour delay, where previously they're not blocks at all.
So we'd have to. I prefer to look at a specific example, which I unfortunately don't have in front of me. But you could, because we are generally raising the block threshold in any case from 50% notional that was set based on 2010 numbers to 67% notional based on 2019 numbers. We're just over and across the board going to be raising the block levels for everyone. And so that will mean that what you said would be easier to address if we were not raising all the levels. There's a possibility that you won't be increasing blocks in the case of Japanese yen because they now would have their block threshold raised as well. There are some other asset classes like the credit asset class where we're moving away from spreads and moving towards specific CDS products, and we're blocking CDS products that are off the run effectively between 0 and 4 years and over 6 years. And in those cases, you could imagine that potentially CDS product had a small spread and could have received block treatment, and now we would be giving it block treatment because there are so few of those trades that we're just giving them all block treatment in those. It's sort of like it's basically an other category for very illiquid markets.
So sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to ask Megan to add to that, please.
I think it might help if we explain it too, that there are a few different variables changing in the proposal. So we're not just changing the block delay itself, we're also adjusting the current categories that lead to that block delay. So I think Matt was trying to explain that when you adjust the categories, which we think is a really positive change based on the data we've gotten and our analysis over the past 2 years, it's not as simple as just saying the delay will be extended for a certain category or a certain number of swaps. when you change both sides of this, there's going to be variation, and we're going to figure out how that will play out.
Another question then would, maybe it's the same question asked differently, but for trades that there is currently a delay in reporting, something that is a block under the current rule for which there is a delay, under the new rule, would the delay be longer? Are there certain of those categories?
So if your category kept you still subject to a block delay, your delay would be longer.
Okay.
But if your category resulted in you no longer passing the threshold, you wouldn't necessarily benefit from the delay being longer.
Okay, so I guess the point I think we should consider that I think it's a positive development, this granularity in block sizes, but and it may be complex, but I think it's necessary then. We've taken a stride forward in getting this granularity, but at the same time, we've just dropped down the 48-hour delay across the board, where I think these different markets have different liquidity and factors, and therefore the delay period also would seem to be appropriately tailored based on data and the characteristics of those particular blocks, and 48 hours wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for every single one of them.
I think that's exactly the issue, and I hope that the proposal lays that out well enough for everybody to understand it, because I know it's complicated, but I think that sums it up, and we'll look at the comments.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So let me move on then to part 40. Before I move off, I do have one more question. So this may be redundant, but I want to make it absolutely clear to the commenters, and that the proposal is for 48 hours, but there would be not a notice and comment issue if we there's sufficient notice and comment in the proposal through the discussion that we would have the flexibility to adopt another number time delay without having to repropose this.
Staff doesn't expect there would be an issue, and we would point commenters to some of the questions in the proposal that lay out the different options to help them when they give us their feedback.
Okay, and I'd just like to make it clear for commenters that we're specifically considering less than 48 hours. I think the staff discussion has exhibited that. So it's all fair game where we end up. You know, we'll be through the comment process, and there's no prejudgment, but it's fair game. So thank you. Okay, so now I can move to part 45, and I'm going to start again granular and then go up. I want to just clarifying the technical specifications. My understanding is that the Commission would delegate the staff to the authority to publish technical specifications for both Part 43 and Part 45. And obviously these technical specifications for exactly how the data is reported are significant. So can you just explain what those technical specifications are and what they're for and what the publication process is?
Sure. So the technical specification contains the list of swap data elements that would have to be reported to SDRs. And then as a new development, we're proposing standards, formats, allowable values, and validation conditions for every data element, which we don't currently have under current Part 45. Staff currently has delegated authority under both Part 45 and Part 43. We're proposing to update those delegations consistent with all the other rule changes. And the plan is that today you're voting on proposals that contain the lists of all of these data elements in the appendices as they currently are today, but updated. And at the same time, when the proposal goes into the Federal Register, DMO will publish the technical specification on cftc.gov for everybody to comment on the technical specification as well. And then when we finalize the rules after we've gotten comment from everybody, DMO would, pursuant to the delegations of authority, publish the form and manner of those technical standards in the Federal Register. So what would go into the Federal Register would be the format, standards, allowable values, the technical aspects of reporting, but not the substance of the fields that have to be reported that are in the appendices.
So we're standardizing the that elements directly in the document that we're voting on, and then these technical specifications was like how you report, the manner and form of reporting for those. Is that essentially correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that's helpful, and that will help market participants comment on the appropriate documents in the appropriate places. Let me move to something I touched on in my opening statement, the use cases for this data. And I view this rule, this Part 45 and Part 43, as establishing the fundamental building blocks for the data analysis. We can't do the analysis and fulfill the mission that we're charged with unless we have good quality data, unless it's standardized, unless we can aggregate it across SDR, unless we have it's in the same format, unless we have confidence in the validity of that and the validity of that data. And these rules are really to establish those building blocks for further analysis. And I think John, you've given some indication of the analysis that you currently use with the existing data. And I think that's been helpful. But I'm also concerned about ultimately what we're going to use all this data for. I get asked this question all the time, like, what do you use all this data for? And what good is it? And what does it tell you? And like, do you know systemic risk? So that's ultimately what people are asking. And there's a lot of money being and resources both in this agency and in the private sector in terms of data. We issue enforcement actions for people who don't report data. And so Congress expects the agency to be using this data. And so this rule, as I said, it's really for the fundamental building blocks. It's not how we're going to use the data. There are a number of references in the rule that says, well, we're going to use this for systemic risk, we're going to use that for or risk monitoring various risks, but it really doesn't go into specificity. Maybe it's not the appropriate document to do that, but I don't know if the Commission has really laid this out elsewhere either, how it's going to use all the data and what are the potential uses. So you've identified several of these. Can the data that we're getting, is this data going to be useful to measure systemic risk, or is this just idiosyncratic risks between parties or academic studies? When we talk about measuring risk, and the document does that, this data field will be used to measure risk, that data field will be used to measure risk. What are we ultimately talking about in terms of the utility of this data as a risk measurement tool?
So I think in the Commission, you have a lot of different divisions using the data for different purposes. And one of the objectives of bringing everyone together to determine the data we need was to figure out how we optimize each division's use going forward. But I think you also have to remember that this is hopefully a first step towards sharing data with other regulators. And to the extent we're looking at systemic risk, we need to share data to get the full picture of the risk to the US. So while I think right now our focus is more on the data we have access to, subject to the cross-border guidance, and any no action letters existing impacting who reports to us, I think the goal in the future is to share this data to start looking across borders. Do you have anything to add?
So it's a good question because you're right, it's a ton of data that's coming in, it's expensive to report, and what are we doing with it is on everybody's minds in the market, right? So piggybacking off Megan's answer on systemic risk, I mean, there's obviously the global notion of systemic risk. We have much more clearing now, so there's clearinghouse risk. So now the question is sort of what's in the uncleared space that could affect clearinghouses, because that's a concentration of risk. In addition, just cleaning up the data will allow us to do a better job of monitoring the markets, which is sort of statutorily required, right? And then the other piece of it is we're trying to put as much value back to the market as we can through reports, and you know, we have the weekly swaps report that's been around for a while. Bruce, our chief economist, came up with this notion of entity-netted notionals, which is a much more useful measure of risk in the markets. So better data will allow us to do more of that, and so we're going to make the markets more transparent for market participants. which like we mentioned earlier is really good for end users who didn't have a look into the general markets before this data was available. It's better for dealers too, because dealers are on one side of every trade anyway, so, but they also only see their own book. So if you're a big dealer, you see maybe 40% of the market, but you don't know what the rest is. So all that said, I think the last piece of systemic risk is, if you're looking at some sort of buildup of systemic risk that could be a problem for the system, measurement of risk is a big issue, right? So we're getting some data elements that we haven't gotten before in terms of collateral and margin, which is super helpful, and then better counterparty data and better transaction identification data lets us know who's doing what and how much they're doing of it, so we can identify emerging trends that might be something we want to follow up on. And again, the benefit for these markets being so concentrated is a dealer's on one side of almost every trade. So if we see a big buildup, odds are we can call one of our registrants and ask them about it. So
we've spent a lot of, appropriately, and again, I commend the staff, and you've worked many years on this. It's been a multi-year effort going back to when I was here initially. Worked on it, leave, come back, we're still working on the same issues. But that indicates the dedication to the issue and the seriousness of it. Once we get those building blocks, or now that we're going to get these building blocks, like, we really got to focus on what we're going to do with it and how we're going to measure these risks. There's an expectation, rightfully so. We've spent a lot of time and money and asked the market participants to spend a lot of time and money building the system, and we ought to be able to use it for the purposes that Congress intended. It's a tough question. How do you measure systemic risk? If you have all the data in the world, would you know what systemic risks are? A lot of people in the private sector thinking about that question too. So I would urge greater focus at the Commission on the use cases for this data. I know that in building up the data elements, that the use cases were a factor or were considered and to justify the various data elements. But we really need to then go ahead and figure out how to analyze it, ensure organizationally that each division does it, but we work cross divisions as well. And one thing you mentioned, John, I just have an additional question on, and that's exposure reporting. We are requiring a margin reporting of margin and collateral for the first time in this rule. My understanding is that we don't have reporting of the exposures in the portfolio for which this collateral is being collected. So is the data that we're going to be getting permit us to check compliance with uncleared swap margin requirements, or what are we using the margin the data for here, or what?
So going back to trying to ensure each division has what it needs from the data, we did have to consider that this is one single data set among many at the Commission, and the uncleared margin rules, from what I understand, compliance with those involves looking at the dealer's models and a lot of other things in that rule that I'm sure DSIO could explain much better than myself. But if there are limitations in the Part 45 data, I think the Commission would consider that and work with DSIO to make sure they have what they need to monitor unclear margin compliance.
Okay, I appreciate that, and then sort of reinforces what I was previous point, that we, the Commission, needs a holistic view of what we're using all this data for. We need to ensure that we're collecting what we're going to be able to use, and that we use what we're collecting. So further discussion on that, whether we're collecting enough, or I think some people, whether we're collecting too much. So we'll see. We'll get comments on this and look forward to those. So I thank you again for your work on this and the discussions with me and my office over the past several weeks on it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Berkovitz. Well, are the commissioners prepared to vote? Okay, If so, Mr. Kirkpatrick, will you please call the roll for the proposed amendments to Part 43?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The part of the motion that is now before the Commission for a vote is on the approval of the proposed rulemaking on Part 43. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
Aye.
Commissioner Quintens votes aye. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 5, the noes have 0.
Thank you very much. The ayes have it, and the motion to adopt the proposed rule is hereby approved. You can applaud, that's fine. Mr. Kirkpatrick, would you please call the roll for the proposed amendments to Part 45?
The part of the motion now before the Commission for a vote is on the approval of the proposed amendments to Part 45. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
Aye.
Commissioner Quintens votes aye. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 5, the noes have 0.
Once again, the ayes have it, and the motion to adopt the proposed rule is hereby approved. And lastly, would you please call the roll to reopen the comment period for Part 49?
The final part of the motion before the Commission for a vote is on the approval of the reopening of the Part 49 comment period. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
Aye.
Commissioner Quintens votes aye. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 5, the noes have 0.
Once again, the ayes have it, and the motion to reopen the comment period is approved. Well, I would like to thank the staff again for your outstanding work. Really a tremendous job over the last 5 to 8 years. I'd also like to announce that we're planning 2 open commission meetings in March. The first will address more reporting issues, while the second will be our first open meeting outside of Washington. We'll be in Kansas City, Missouri, where we're going to present some customer protection-related issues. Now I'd like to give my fellow commissioners an opportunity to make closing statements. We'll go in reverse order of seniority. So with that, Commissioner Berkovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a productive meeting. We've had a good discussion of the issues. Once again, I support your commitment to open meetings and robust discussion. I think that's critical to the functioning of the Commission. I think it helps improve our decisions. I benefit greatly from the discussions and everybody's questions and the back and forth and the staff's answers. I think the public scrutiny it installs in us a certain discipline to prepare for these meetings and refine our thoughts. And I think that from my perspective, it's a very helpful process, and I hope the public benefits. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from members of the public in terms of our commitment to open decision-making, and so I think today has been another productive day in that respect. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Berkovitz. Commissioner Stump.
Thank you. Again, I just want to thank you all. I didn't mention earlier, but of particular importance to me with regard to these rules is, in fact, that we're applying a pragmatic application and objective to global data harmonization. I think it's particularly important with regard to this set of rules that we're able to utilize the data in a coordinated supervision efforts that we intend to enter into with our global partners in the regulatory space. I've said this before, the next crisis won't be the same as the last, but we're certainly not going to solve it any quicker or better without harmonized data, and that's super important with regard to all of the other things we are tasked with doing, whether it's monitoring uncleared margin for the swap debt for the swap dealers we're responsible for, with some of this margin and collateral information that we're going to be receiving, or various other things that we're tasked with doing. I would like to say, though, this isn't the end. This isn't the final opportunity for us to weigh in on this. Not only will we need to finalize this rule, but I will continue to press very hard for identified use cases for the information. And I mentioned, Commissioner Berkovitz mentioned this, and I believe that we do need to monitor for collateral and margin adequacy with regard to the swap dealers we're responsible for. But I do question, and I ask the public to weigh in on whether or not this is something that we need to be doing in the context of this rule. Is the SDR the right place to be receiving this? Because this is where we receive transaction data, and collateral is done on a portfolio basis. So I would like to hear from the public on that. But that's not the only thing that I'm going to continue to work on. I'm hopeful that when we finalize these rules, that we'll be able to also contemplate working together to prepare for the implementation and turning to a principle-based analysis and the eventual granting of substituted compliance determinations with swap data reporting regimes in other jurisdictions, and also harmonizing high-quality data with other domestic and international regulators to facilitate aggregation and oversight going forward. And I hope this encourages our regulatory counterparts in all jurisdictions to also lead in adopting standardized data sets so that we can all do the job we were tasked with doing 10 years ago. So thanks again to the staff for your hard work. I look forward to working with you going forward on finalizing these rules, working on substitute compliance, proving the use cases, and various other things. So you guys won't tire of seeing me, I'm certain. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Stump. Commissioner Benham.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to acknowledge and thank Commissioner Stump for her work on these issues and her initiative. She deserves a lot of credit for it and making the commission better. Certainly not, data is not something that catches the headlines all the time, but it's so critical, it's so important, and all of you know that. And thanks to all of you. I also neglected to thank Kate and ODT, so I want to thank ODT for their absolutely invaluable work, which obviously is the linchpin to all of this, right, as we talk about data. So thank you. And also want to recognize the Secretariat, a lot of late nights in the past couple months, but thanks for your work, and Mr. Chairman, appreciate everything you've done, and look forward to moving forward on these rules.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Benham. Commissioner Quintans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to echo the comments of my fellow commissioners in thanking the hard work of the staff over a very long period of time. And the culmination of those efforts in today. But to reiterate what Commissioner Stump said, unfortunately the work's not over, but I think that the light is at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we're seeing it, and it won't be that long until we're back here to consider a great final product, and one that is needed and has been a long time coming. As I've said before, the thing to me that really turned the last significant financial recession into a global financial crisis was the panic associated with the recession that was fueled by the opacity of positions in the mortgage market and in the derivative space. Not necessarily the direct exposures, but the lack of awareness of what those exposures were. And the more that we can do to provide ourselves and hopefully the marketplace with data that removes that opacity, the less we have to worry about this part of the market fueling the next crisis. And I compliment all of your work in improving our response to systemic risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Quintans, and thank you again for your outstanding work. I think these proposals address all of the issues over the last 8 years or so. I think that in terms of the one subject that garnered the most attention, I think, from the commissioners today is that issue of block trades. And it's tough because Congress asked us to balance two things, right? They asked us to balance transparency on the one hand with liquidity on the other, making sure our end users had cheap access to hedging needs. So we want to get that right. We're committed to getting that right. I think you heard from a number of commissioners, myself and certainly Commissioner Berkovitz, but probably others as well, that there's the possibility of greater granularity, of having some that are 48 hours, maybe some that are not 48 hours, and just working that out. So this is an area, and as Commissioner Quinten said, data is awfully important. We're relying on the great data analysis that you guys have done to come up with sort of this proposal, but I think if there's additional data that can be brought to bear, that would be truly helpful during this comment period, but we're committed to getting it right. Also, I just want to say that I think everyone agrees that once we get this data, it's in place, and we start receiving it, we do have to figure out how we're going to use it. And that's a really important issue that I think a number of you have raised. And we're doing some thinking internally, the CFTC. Are we best organized as an organization, as an agency, to start thinking about this? And so we are thinking about, once we get these reporting rules in place, how are we best organized to consider and make use of this great data to achieve our mission? So with that, there being no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor of adjourning the meeting will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Well, the ayes have it. Again, I'm grateful to the staff for your outstanding work, and this meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you.